Assalamu alaikum dear students, and welcome to the 58th session of the KIPS Distance Learning Program Current Affairs Newspaper Roundup session. I'm your host Shahrukh Khadir. Today we are going to see the latest developments that have happened in the Afghan peace process. And this one particular development is a very important development because it has given some hope that the Afghan peace process is progressing at a rate which might yield some positive result in the near future. But before that, we need to see what kind of mindset did the parties involved in the Afghan peace process have in the first place, and how that mindset actually evolved and then manifested in their negotiations, in their bilateral talks, and what kind of results did that talks reveal. So, talking about the seriousness of the parties involved, I think all parties have been very determined to reach an agreement, as was represented by the Afghan government and Taliban willingness to engage with each other comprehensively on multiple platforms, first in Doha and then later on in other Afghanistan locations as well. Secondly, when talking about Pakistan has outrightly extended its full diplomatic and political support to the Afghan peace process and given its good diplomatic offices to reach any kind of agreement that would further the cause for peace in Afghanistan. Moreover, you might know that the Afghan Chief Executive and the head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, visited Pakistan and India subsequently to generate a kind of a regional consensus and confidence in the Afghan peace process, and I believe that has yielded some results recently. He also lauded Pakistan's role in the Afghan peace process, perhaps for the first time, whereas in the past Abdullah Abdullah has been very critical of Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, and he has blamed Pakistan for creating instability and spreading terrorism and using proxy groups to create instability and violence in Pakistan. But now his tone and his way of addressing Pakistan was completely different, and he lauded Pakistan's role. And finally, US has been extremely serious about reaching a peaceful agreement, naturally because that was important for the Trump administration as a political gimmick, and also generally because the Afghan war is extremely unpopular among the American public. So in that respect, the US has consistently pressurized both parties, the Afghan government and the Afghan Taliban, to negotiate with each other to the maximum and most comprehensive extent. In that regard, the US has even put pressure on the Afghan government to go ahead, if you remember, with the prisoner release agreement when the Ashraf Ghani administration was refusing to do so. The US threatened to cut the aid that Afghanistan receives in its budget from US every year, which was more than 50% of their budget, by the way. So that's how the US basically pressurized Afghan government to release Taliban prisoners and move forward with the 29th February 2020 agreement that was signed between the Afghan Taliban and the United States for reaching a peaceful settlement. So what kind of biggest hurdles can we see in the Afghan peace process going forward? Well, I think the biggest hurdle, at least for the time being, is reaching a ceasefire in Afghanistan, on Afghan land, because for the time being, violence is extremely high in Afghanistan. The conflict and the constant fighting between the Afghan government forces and the Afghan Taliban forces refuses to abate. And the second, of course, important hurdle is to ensure that a sustainable ceasefire agreement is reached, which would continue to be respected by all parties involved. And thirdly, and more critically perhaps, is the question of Daesh or Islamic State in the Khorasan province of Afghanistan, which is rapidly gaining ground, becoming more violent and conducting more terrorist activities. Now, quite naturally, as you might understand, that terrorist organizations thrive amid conflict and on ungoverned land and areas around the world, and they would never want a peaceful and settled Afghanistan, because that would decrease their scope and their space in Afghanistan substantially, and one day might even eliminate Daesh. So that is why Daesh will try to derail the entire peace process. They have tried to do it in the past, and they would continue to do it. Largely, it falls upon the Taliban and their forces to contain the ISIS threat and not allow them to threaten the Afghan peace process. So let's look at the most important development that we have seen yesterday. So the Afghan government and the Taliban have signed a breakthrough agreement in their negotiations recently, which is seen as a beacon of hope in the Afghan peace process. Now, the agreement sets a basic framework for how the negotiations will proceed further and what kind of comprehensive dialogue will happen between the two sides and on what terms. Now, this is very important because this sets a basic groundwork or framework for how talks will happen, and certain rules and regulations have been defined. That's a basic structure that any comprehensive dialogue needs, and it's a welcome gesture that has been finalized. The US Special Representative to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, who by the way is also an Afghan by ethnicity, said that the two sides had agreed on a and this is his words, on a 3-page agreement codifying rules and procedures for their negotiations on a political roadmap and a comprehensive ceasefire. These words are good, they are positive, and they are hopeful, right? But at the same time, the ceasefire is still out of sight because the Taliban refused to agree to it. Perhaps they have more stringent conditions before a ceasefire could be effective. Now, finally, I think the question of the structure of a future post-peace government in Afghanistan is one of the most important questions that will definitely become a big sticking point or a white elephant during the negotiations. The Afghan government wants to keep and retain the Republican Constitution of Afghanistan and want the future government to be a democratic Republican government as it is in the United States and the current puppet government in Kabul. Whereas on the other hand, the Taliban want to revive the age-old Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which was overthrown by the US and NATO forces under the Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001 after the 9/11 attacks. These positions are completely irreconcilable, and it's difficult to predict at this time who will budge and who will compromise, but probably there is going to be some kind of hybrid government system in Afghanistan which tries to accommodate both of their demands. So with that, thank you very much for your patience. Allah Hafiz.